Hey guys, it's Ruben with the Survival University, and it's been a long time waiting, but we're doing knife sharpening today. Keep watching. See the tools? You're excited too. I know, I get it. Just butterflies and all that. Yeah. All right. So we're gonna go over a few things real quick and talk about bevels, coarse, medium, fine, extra fine. We're gonna redefine those, and then of course show you the technique on how to sharpen knives. So the first thing I always teach when sharpening knives is you want to know where the bevel is on your knife. Okay, so with this one we have a Scandi grind, right, which is a single bevel. The single bevel, if I turn it this way, you can see the sides right here is a 90-degree angle, right? That first change of angle from 90 degrees is your first bevel. That's why this is a single bevel. See that? Now with the secondary bevel, you'll see that there's going to be another change of angle real close to the bottom there. So here we have the Bark River Aurora, and if you look at this one, let me turn it down this way, you have the 90 degrees there, and then right here is your first change of angle, and then you have the second edge right there. That's your secondary bevel. So we're looking at both knives together. The reason why this is so important is because of this whole surface right here, and then just that small surface right there is what's going to be hitting the stone. People that have a single bevel will sharpen like a secondary bevel, and people with a secondary bevel will sharpen like a single bevel. Okay, what that means is, to me, is if I'm sharpening this knife on the stone, I'm going to sharpen it as if it has a small edge on there. You don't want to do that. You want this whole surface area right here to touch the stone, right where my finger is. With the secondary bevel, you see that small edge, that's what you want to touch on the stone. But that's pretty much the gist of it when it comes to bevels. Once you get that, everything else is pretty easy. Let me put these right here. So what I carry are the Falk-Niven stones, the DC4 and the CC4, and I'll tell you in a little bit why I do carry those. But what I want to go over is, when you're looking into knife sharpening and you go to different stores, you'll see the stones, they say coarse, medium, fine, and extra fine. The numbers, what they mean is, for a coarse stone, you're going to get around 240 to about 400 grit. Coarse is going to be coarser grit. Medium is going to be around 400 to about 800. Fine is going to be 800 to 2500 to 3000. And ultra fine or extra fine is going to be around 3000 to about 6000 grit. Okay, that's when you're polishing your knives. So let's redefine those a little bit, because that confuses a lot of people when it comes to sharpening, because they don't know which stone to start with. And you think you're going to start with the coarse stone, which is going to take off a lot of material and it's going to wear out your knife a lot faster. Okay, so let's redefine them. So you have coarse is going to be reprofile. Okay, reprofile meaning you have a square stock, a crowbar, just a chunk of metal, and you need to put a new edge on that knife. Okay, so that usually happens if you break the tip of your knife and you want to bring that edge back. Okay, so that's why, because it's so coarse, it's going to take off a lot of material. Medium is repair. Kind of confusing when you're thinking about reprofile and repair, but okay, so repair to me, if I take this, and I don't know if you can see that shine right where my finger is, that right there is what I think of as repair, because it has little nicks and everything. Okay, the edge is there, but I need to refine it a little bit, so that's where I'm going to use repair. That's what the medium stones are for. After that, then you have fine, which is sharpening. And when I say sharpening, it's going to be, you don't have any nicks or anything, you just got to touch it up a little bit, but it doesn't have the bite that it used to. Then I use the sharpening side, which is the fine stone. And then you have extra fine, which is you want to hone or polish your knife. It's two different things. Honing itself is you straightening out the edge, because a lot of times the edge, or the edge will roll itself a little bit when you're using it. So honing is actually straightening the edge back to its apex. Okay, at the same time, with the CC4 on this white side, you're polishing the stone, or polishing the edge of the knife. So when you're polishing, it's going to bring it to a nice sharp edge. Let's talk about the stones real quick and why I carry these. So I've used different stones, from Japanese whetstones, rocks out in creeks. So the reason I choose these stones is because they're ceramic and diamond, which means they're not going to dish out. If you use Japanese whetstones, a lot of times when you're wearing them out, you'll get that dishing action coming in or happening in the stone itself. And that dishing action is going to get you a kind of a convex edge. It's going to mess up your edge and mess up your angles, and you don't want that. But when I'm out in the field, these things stay pretty flat. So for this gold one right here, this is the medium side. These two, which I call, they're gray, but I call it blue sapphire because it's blue sapphire ceramic. These are your sharpening side. This is your fine side. And then right here you have your extra fine, which is your polishing side. Now I'm going to say polishing a lot of times because if you look at a Japanese, like a samurai sword, I tell everybody all the time, this kind of clicks with them. When you're sharpening a knife sharpening is the byproduct of you polishing the edge. Okay, that's very important. So if I'm polishing that edge up and getting into a mere shine, then you're able to get your knife super, super sharp. So let's go ahead and start working on one, and then we're going to talk about a burr, which is very important, and we'll go into that. So no, not a bear, a burr. Yeah, not a burr. There's burrs out here. We're going to start sharpening this knife a little bit. Now what I want to do is I want to take my single bevel, or the edge itself, and I want to drop it down right where it's touching. Okay, when I mean it's touching, the edge is on the stone flat. So if I turn it at an angle like this, you can see how that whole side of the edge is touching the stone, right? I'm going to keep that angle the whole time. When I'm holding my stones, I'm going to hold them kind of where my fingertips aren't out too far where they're going to, get cut. And you may cut yourself, just be careful. There are other ways to use a stone, like laying it down and sharpening with the bigger knife and stuff, but I'll go on that in a little bit. So anyways, whenever I'm sharpening forward, my index finger is on the blade itself, and that's going to apply pressure. So if I'm going forward, it's going to be my index finger. If I'm going back, it's going to be my thumb. So always think that you're pushing forward, index finger, thumb backwards. And what I'm doing is I'm not going to go across like this. You'll see that a lot of times, but the stone is so small, it's going to take a while for you to take off a lot of metal. So instead, what I want to do is go back and forth, and I'm applying pressure when I go forward, and I'm lightening up when I come back. Forward and back. Okay? And what I'm doing is I'm just grinding that metal away. Now it sounds and looks like I'm grinding back as well. I'm trying not to put too much pressure on the way back. What I'm doing is I'm using the stone as a guide to keep the knife on the stone itself. What I don't want to see people doing is this. Okay, this little flick thing at the tip, all you're doing is you're taking off the tip itself, and you're going to make it rounded. You don't want to do that. Keep the tip on the stone. And as you can see, I'm moving my way down the knife itself. Get to the bottom, go back, and I'm going to flip it. Thumb backwards, same technique. I'm not doing this. I'm going across. I'm not flicking the tip off the stone. And all you're doing is grinding metal away. I mean, you can count it. You could say, 3 passes here, 3 passes back and forth. All I'm doing is taking the metal away. So if I want to go back and forth a few, come back, I'll count that as 1. Go back and forth and back up, count that as 1. And I'll just go keep back and forth, going back and forth while I do that. Let me go ahead and sharpen this up a little bit, and I'll be right back with you. So while I'm sharpening, I want you guys to notice something as well, because this tip can be a little bit of a pain if you don't know what you're doing. So what I'm doing is, you see my angle on the blade itself while I'm here? A lot of times when people are sharpening the tip, you want to change that angle by going forward and back, which is not what you want to do. If you watch the stone, what I'm doing is I'm raising my hand up as I go to the tip. Watch carefully. As I go to the tip, you see how my hand goes up? That's how you sharpen the tip. That's how you're going to change your angle. You don't want to change it back and forth. So that's very important. Let's talk about a burr, which is important. Not a burr, a burr. When you start working the knife to the apex of the edge itself, the metal has nowhere else to go. So if you think of yourself shoveling, no, it's going to come up on the shovel itself, right? Same thing kind of happens with the burr itself, with that metal, extra metal coming over the edge of the knife itself. So when you're sharpening, you'll have a burr or a piece of metal that folds up from where you were sharpening. So if I was sharpening down like this, more than likely the burr is going to be on this side. Same with the opposite. If I'm going backwards, it's going to be on this side. But what you're looking for, and pay attention to this part because I don't want you cutting yourself, go from the back of the blade forward, just like this. And what you'll find is that you'll find a little lip of metal on one side or the other. I can feel it right there. And that's when I know I have a burr. Now, the burr itself, like I said, once you reach an apex based on this grit, that's when you're gonna know you have a sharp edge, based on this grit. Now, when I said before, you wanna push pressure while you go forward and not back, is because you're gonna prematurely cause yourself to have a burr because you're pushing that metal forward and around the edge, and it's not going to be because the edge is sharp. That's why it's very important to watch out for that. So I have a burr. After I've used this one, now I can move to the next level, which is going to be your fine side. I do not move to the next level until I get a burr, ever. If you do, you're not going to have a sharp knife. You're just going to be polishing the edge and the apex won't be there. Okay. Now that I have a burr, I'm going to continue with this one. I'm going to go with the fine, and we're going to start working it like I was before. So now we have a burr again. That's when I move to the next stone. And we're going to go to the polishing side, the extra fine. So now that we got a burr with the fine side, now we're going to go with the extra fine and keep on going. The longer you spend on the coarse or medium side, the less time you got to spend on the fine and the extra fine. That's why it takes somebody so long to sharpen a knife. They're like, oh, it takes forever. It really doesn't. If you take off enough metal in the beginning with this proper stone, meaning if it's reprofile or repair, then these ones will go pretty fast. You just got to really set yourself in a mindset where you're just going to polish the blade now. And we're just going to continue. So now we got a good burr with the extra fine. Now, usually when you see somebody test with their thumb, this cracks me up every time because people would be like, oh yeah, that's nice. They don't know what they're looking for. So I'm going to show you that today. What I'm looking for, and be very careful because I don't want you cutting your thumbs, is I want it to bite right at my fingerprint. So if I'm touching it, I can feel right there it's grabbing my fingerprint, and I don't want to go any further because it's going to cut my finger. Go again. Right there it stopped. Right there it stopped. Right there it stopped. If you really want to know what it's like to feel a sharp blade on your thumb like that, get a razor blade or a shaving razor, and you can feel it. Be careful with that. I probably shouldn't be telling people to do that because it's dangerous, and there's some people out there that's going to jack themselves up. I know it. Just understand why I'm showing you this, okay? So after we've sharpened the knife, next step is going to be to strop, which is very cool with these Vulcanevens. So I'm going to put the stone back in to make this rigid. And what this leather is doing, this leather is actually grabbing that burr, and that burr is going to go back and forth. Okay, so when the leather hits, that burr is going to go back and forth, it's going to pop off. I know as kids and stuff, we used to bend the metal or bend a piece of metal and it pops. It's the same idea. So, same technique, but we're going backwards. Okay, I'm not going to go forward because you're going to cut into the leather. So what I'm doing is my index finger is going to be on the blade, and I'm going to pull backwards. Okay, thumb going back, and all I'm doing is I'm going back and forth to break off that burr to expose the true edge. And we're going to do that about 50 times each side, maybe even 100 times, depending on when the burr breaks off. It's just really what it comes down to, is when the burr comes off. So now I'm thumb testing again, and this thing is razor sharp now. Now, I test by shaving my arm. There is also another test where you can set it on your thumbnail. You can see how it's grabbing my thumbnail. So it's grabbing right there. Is that white? Ooh, too much. But that's another way to test it. So if you can shave with it, let's see if we get the light. My little ashy arms. Ew. Ew. You can see the hair popping off with some skin too. That's nasty, man. Oh, I need some lotion. But yeah, you get the idea. That was gross. So that's pretty much it. You're taking off metal off the blade itself. You're polishing the edge. You want to make sure that you're reaching that apex of the edge, and you're getting a sharp blade. That's it. It's not really complicated. You can test it on paper, you know, cutting paper. The reason I like using paper is because it shows you if there's any nicks in the blade, and I'll do another video on that some other time. I don't have paper with me right now. So while we're talking about knife sharpening, let's show you a couple other ways you can actually set the stone down. So you saw me using it by hand, and what I usually do is I'll wet the stones a little bit because you don't want to be breathing that stuff in. Another way I can do it is I'll set this on a table and have it pinned or something, and I'll sharpen the blade on the table itself. That's another way you can do it. For bigger blades, what I like doing is holding the blade itself and then taking the stone far back like this and going back and forth. Watch your fingers doing this, because I mean you can easily slip up, I mean with any knife sharpening. But this is the scary part. I'm going to flip the blade. Now you can see how my fingers are in the way. Be very careful with that. Go slow if you have to, okay? And all I'm doing is just grinding that metal away. So you could do one of three ways. Don't get stuck on a technique. Don't get stuck on this is the proper way to do it. Find your own way. Pick up the stone, see what works for you. I like putting my index finger on the blade, thumb on the back. If that doesn't work for you, don't do it. Do it your own way. But I want you guys to get really familiar with finding your own techniques and growing into becoming a person that can sharpen a knife your way. Because if you create a new way, you're creating a new way to teach, and that might be easier for somebody to learn than what I'm doing. So create your own way. Okay, so that's pretty much it with basic knife sharpening. I mean, I can go into a lot more detail, which I do in class. Hint, hint, we have classes. But if you have any questions or whatever, let us know. I can try my best to show you online, but of course, come to our classes, and I teach this on all the basic classes. So thank you. Now go home and practice.